type of muscles that you've got in your arms versus elsewhere. They're reactive, so you feel the clay push against your hand, and so you push back, but just a second too late, and so you actually push it off more rather than fix it. But you squeeze it all up, and then you make it all skinny, and then you push, you keep it centered as you go down until you're all the way to the bottom, and then you just keep trying to push down harder, and it will fill all of the available space all the way down to that bottom. Anytime it gets dry, it'll tend to catch and start wobbling and other things like that. So anyway, then you make your entry, and instead of opening it the full width that you would normally do this, bowls by definition, in ceramics at least, have a continuous curve across the bottom. Cylinders have a flat bottom. Everything you make on the wheel starts out as one or the other. Depending on the type of bottle you want to make, it'll start out as either a bowl or a cylinder. If you want it to have a round bottom, then it starts out as a bowl. If you want it to have a flat bottom, it starts out as a cylinder. So bowls and cylinders are what we're going to make. And so you can open it and just bring your finger up as you open it, because you don't want it to be a flat opening. You want it to be a curved opening. Or it kind of naturally does that if you skip the opening part and you just make your entry and then squeeze in here and start pulling up. Now on the outside, this looks really, really similar to what I was doing before, right? It doesn't look really wide like a bowl. That's because pulling clay, getting the clay from down here in there and out and all the way across while it's wide is really hard. Getting the clay that's up to go wide is really easy. So while I'm trying to get this clay down here at the bottom, I want it to be mostly up. I want to pull mostly up, but I'll let it go a little bit wider, and I leave the rim just a little bit thicker because I'm going to stretch it out. So when I go to stretch it out, I don't want it to stretch too thin, which will sometimes make it tear. You also want to keep it compressed often enough so that it doesn't tear and stuff like that. So and what it should do is be a little bit thicker here, thin out there, and then start to get a little bit thicker up in here in a nice gradual sort of way. It's about the shape I want it. It's about the thickness I want it to be, although there's a little inconsistency right here, so I'm going to work across that area to pull that little bit of clay up there, thin it out the way I want it to be. And then I go to stretch it, grab my metal rib or a rubber rib, something flexible, unless you want to use a wooden rib. You just need to, you know that with a wooden rib, you need the right kind of curve if it's a stiff rib. With a flexible rib, you can kind of change the curve as you go. So I'm going to start right in here, start out near the bottom, because if I start out right in the bottom, notice how the clay is kind of piling up right there. If I start in the bottom, right in the center, this side's going this way, and so it's going to catch here, and sometimes that'll gouge things. So I usually start a little ways from, and you can see kind of, if you look up at the screens, I start out kind of right in here, work my way down and across to the middle, and then I go back out, and then when I get out to that point, I push out quite a bit, and I really stretch it out into a bowl. Like I said, stretching clay when it's spinning, you know, when maybe you guys are young enough, they banned all of those little carousel things that your brother could spin you on until you either threw up or flew off. But that's what happens. You get sucked to the outside and you go flying off. That's what the clay wants to do. Go out, so it's really easy to stretch it out. But making this back into a cylinder is really tricky. So better to learn to pull up than to pull out. And I have really high expectations. I want you to learn really good quality work. I want you to learn really good fundamental skills for all of this stuff. So if you do ceramics later on, that you'll have a really solid foundation of the basics, and you can just kind of experiment from there. My advanced classes are really flexible. You do kind of whatever you want as long as you're still working, and we talk occasionally about the direction you're going, like, okay, you've done a lot of bowls, you need to do something else. But if you are just doing this for the art credit or you're really, and I expect effort. If you're just doing this for the art credit and so you don't try, I can't help you. But if you're doing this for the art credit or because you wanted to try something new and you're just not good at it and it's taking you too long and you're just positive you're going to fail the class and you're having panic attacks and wanting to switch out, I can always work with you. We can replace most of these. I have enough extra credit built in that if you spend extra time, which is doing your homework, if you spend time outside of class working on the projects, that's extra credit. So I meet you halfway in a very literal sense when it comes to all of that. But I try and make it so that I never have a student who can't be as successful as they want to be, meaning they can all get A's if they'll put in a little bit of extra work. You know, and because I know, like in some of your other classes, you have to put in all of that extra work just to get, you know, the D because math just doesn't make sense to you. But and then you have to put all that much more work to get your grade all the way up. So I try and make it less, and I don't lower my standards of what I expect you to do as far as the quality, but I do recognize that there's a process, and you know, if you're approaching the goals, that's good, and if you're improving and all of that stuff. So it may seem like there's no way I'm ever going to get this, I need to switch out now. That's not the case. But I do end up with people like, when are you going to show us how to do this? How does this work? And I've just never showed any of that stuff to people. And you know, I wanted to start off with, you see kind of everything, quick overview. Also, I have stuff on my website that I have the demos pretty much all there, so that if you miss a day, or if you get ahead or behind, if it's been too long since the demo, or if you're the only one in the class that's ready to move on, then you can go online, watch the videos done by me or others, and usually the ones done by others are better, which is why I don't have one done by me, and often I'll have both. Paper towel trick thing again. Oh, and if you want to do some decoration to this, you know, it's just kind of a standard sort of a bowl. This is my favorite type of rib, and I don't quite like the curve. It's got a curve here, and then it's got another curve right there, and I want it to have one continuous curve. So I'm going to push right in here, see if I can push that down without this collapsing, and just in case, I'm going to push this into it and bring it up like that, so that I like the shape all the way around. So again, it's one thing you shouldn't just, oh, I'll fix that later. The inside of a bowl should be nice when you pull it off the wheel. The outside can be a little ugly, the rim can even be ugly, but make that curve nice. And then one of the reasons I didn't take the pottery kind of ceramics, I did a bunch of sculpture for a long time through high school and most of college, because I didn't want to spend lots and lots of time developing a skill so that I could make a really nice bowl that looked kind of like the one that I bought at Walmart for $2. It just didn't seem worth it to me. So I encourage and will show you various ways to make them more interesting. When we do sketches, we'll have days that I'm assigning you to come up with ideas for decorating your projects to make them more interesting, more personal, and to make them something that you couldn't buy at Walmart. One of them, with bowls, it's really fun to play around with the shape of the rim. You can make it kind of squared. And one of the things I like to do is give it some edges. pretty good at eyeballing thirds. Odd numbers tend to work better and be more forgiving. If you mess up, if you're gonna do 4, mark it out, because you'll be able to tell that you screwed it up. With thirds, can't always tell, and even if you can, it doesn't bother people so much. It's okay if if you got odd numbers. If they're a little bit odd and they look a little bit weird, then that's usually fine. And then you go about halfway in there and you can kind of push out. And if you go out first, it makes just kind of this nice triangular thing, which makes it easier to, you know, like drink the milk out of your cereal bowl when you're done. It's got like a little spout thing right here. And then if you do this, it's kind of all fancy looking. And the one thing I didn't do is I didn't use the metal rib right on the outside again to get rid of this slip, and so you can see my fingerprints left marks. I had the rib on the inside. I forgot to do that on the outside. I also forgot to do my pre-trimming, which I can do at this point. Sometimes the bowl is in the way when you try and do it at this point with your potter's knife, which is the tool that you will have in your kit. So if that's the case, or if it's just because when you're trying to hold the potter's knife, your hand goes like this and it cuts and does all sorts of funky things to the bottom. This tool is called a Kemper turning tool because it works like the way when you turn on the lathe. By the way, making pottery on the wheel is not called spinning or turning, it's called throwing. And that has weird historical references that I can explain later. But so this works like turning on the wheel, on the lathe, and so this little thing cuts and you kind of change the shape like that, which means it's not as much in the way. It also sticks pretty badly, so you got to make sure that you pull off the chunks often enough that they don't stick to the sides or anything. And I used to make my bowls a lot thinner than this because I like the look and feel of them, but my kids always break them. So a little bit of extra thickness, particularly up in the rim, is good for durability. At the same time, one of the people's biggest complaint with handmade pottery is that it's thick and heavy compared to factory-made pottery, especially like the Corel stuff. It's a type of clay that's slip cast to be as thin as it can possibly be, and it's fired at special temperatures to be extra durable at that size and thickness and all that jazz. So it has to be a bit thicker than that. So sometimes making the rim nice and thin makes it look thinner and lighter and therefore better. And so it's just kind of playing that game back and forth. You don't need any extra thickness in here, and you need a little bit of extra thickness where the foot is, where it actually touches the bottom, but inside of that foot and just outside of that foot, you don't need any extra thickness, so you want to eliminate every little bit of weight that you can, so that you don't have it extra thick. And then if you want to leave a little bit of extra thickness on the rim so that, you know, it doesn't break the first time you're shaking it dry in the sink and hit the faucet, although depending on how hard you hit the faucet it'll break anyway. But I've had a lot of my nicer stuff die that way. That was extra thin and light. And this bowls are a lot easier on one thing for sure. They're easier to pick up because they're always undercut, so you can lift instead of do that. So cylinders, bowls, everything starts out as one or the other. The only other thing that we're really going to do is handles, which we've got 23 minutes. I can show you glazing, which is cool because I usually don't get to that until well after. I try and wait until everybody has something to glaze before I do the glaze demo, so that particularly the students that are behind, they're the ones who are more likely to forget and mess up and maybe be rushed toward the end and do something dumb when it comes to glazing. And glazing is not very forgiving when it comes to making big mistakes. Most of the time, if you make a big mistake, I just don't fire your project until you fixed it, which if you're not paying attention to when I stick it on the little redo shelf, means that I don't fire it. And that seems mean, but it's actually not, because otherwise I could fire it and let it ruin your project and cause damage that you have to get fined for and all that stuff. So it's, yeah, it's actually nicer for me to be mean that way. Okay, so handles. The way I want you to do handles is once your project is leather hard, which is a little bit self-explanatory. Once it holds its shape, it's not sticky. You can handle it, but it's not all the way bone dry. It hasn't changed colors yet when it's leather hard. And I usually like it towards the softer stages of leather hard, especially with the smoother B-mix clay. You're going to put a handle on it. I'm demonstrating on this because I can't put it on that yet. I don't have anything ready. It'll stick to this just long enough for me to show you how, and then it'll, when it dries up, it'll just fall off. So, I'm going to take and roll a carrot shape. So it's fat at one end and skinny at the other end. Cut off any awkward bits I have at either end. Then I don't need that bit right there. And then I want it to be a little bit flattened, so I'll drop it. Officially part of the process. And then it's kind of a D shape, so it's only flattened on one side. So I want it to be a little more round on the flat side and a little more flat on the round side. So I flip it over and I push down on those edges just a tiny bit. And it makes something vaguely like a bean or almond shape. You can make it a little more pointy. I don't like them to be too pointy, so I don't. And then I kind of tap this bit. That compresses the clay a little bit more and makes it a little bit thicker right where I'm going to attach it. Then I slip and score. Easier. Actually, maybe I'll just come and do it over here so that you guys can look at the TV if you can't see my hands. I like to do this standing up, but I'll get over it. I'm not sure how well. I'll try and get it angled so that the camera can see what I'm doing. Maybe I'll zoom in a little. Okay, so slip is a mix of clay and water. So I'm going to get water on there and then scrub back and forth until it's a mix. You can see the slip building up. And this is going to be fairly soft, this is going to be fairly hard. Slipping and scoring well is very important, which means I'm going to need to do a lot of slipping and scoring here, very little here. So a little bit of slip here is good. The scoring helps kind of get into the score marks that we've got here. But of course, since this has already been fired, I can't score this, so you're just going to have to remember to do that part. So, you know, get some slip there, score it, and then we'll stick it on. As you push it, if you kind of wiggle it a little bit, it gets the slip from the middle, squishes it out to the edges, make sure it bonds nicely, and then I kind of go like this, because if you pinch it right in here, you're making a thin spot there, and the whole point of making that carrot shape is what we're going to do is have just gravity bend this handle. Right now it's not bending at all. If I force it to bend, it'll tend to crack across there, and I'll have fingerprints and all that stuff. I want it to just bend with gravity, so I pull it until it's got this nice natural curve to it as it just falls. So I'm going to drag my thumbs along there as I blend those edges in, so I'm pulling the clay from along the whole length of it, or at least, you know, the length of the fat part. And then make this all pretty, and often I'll take like the handle of my needle tool and kind of roll it to make that edge a little bit tighter of a curve than my fingers will do. And I also, because when your hand goes against it, if you follow the curve of your hand curves up before it curves back down, and so it's nice if the clay follows that curve. So I have it aimed a little bit up rather than a little bit down. but then I'm going to have it go straight, either straight like this or a little bit this way, and I'm going to get my fingers all wet so it's all slimy again, and then I'm going to start stretching and shaping it. So first I'm just going to go and use my thumb to even out all the little bumps along the edges, and then I'm going to start thinning it, mostly starting down at the bottom, and this is going to thin the sides this way. We want it to start out thick here and go thin there this way, and start out thick here and go thin there that way. So I could go like this, but usually what it does is it twists on you and does weird things that way. So what I do is I wrap my fingers, I wrap my fingers around one side and use my thumb. On the other side, I don't know, I can't. Camera's in the wrong place for this. But I wrap my fingers around this way and use my thumb here, and then I use my thumb there, and then I flip it, use my thumb here, and use my thumb there to pull along the whole length. So I'm going to go thinning, across there, smoothing out any weird bumps and shapes. You can also do the little dent right down the groove right down the middle that makes it a little bit thinner and lighter while being just as strong. Same reason they do the groove down the middle of broadswords. And they have the thin spot in I-beams. Sometimes that's a little bit tricky, so you skip that part and just make it. And then I squeegee all the way to the ends here, so I use the webbing of my fingers. There. Use the webbing of my fingers to smooth out that little edge. And then it's loosening the clay up a little bit, so now it's bending into a nice natural curve. You can pull it down and have it bend the rest of the way just a little bit, but notice it's bending a little more right here than it is in this area, because that's thick and then it gets abruptly thin. It's also drying this out because it's attached to bisqueware instead of the leather hard clay, which means it's sucking more water out. This is getting pretty dry, but that's pretty good. And if I pull it down and then stick it tight, when it dries it shrinks and it will pull itself off. So instead you pull it down and then lift it up a tiny bit. That also makes room for your pinky, or however many fingers you have. If you have 2 fingers, it makes room for the bottom finger or third or pinky or whatever. So pops that up a little bit and then you squish it on there. Usually it's already covered with slip, so it needs very little, no slipping and scoring on the handle, and very little on the cup unless it's excessively dry. And then you kind of blend that in, and I usually leave it there and I bag up the whole thing so that none of it dries out until the moisture from this is kind of seeped into here and they both become leather hard. And then I go in and I add a little tiny coil to this bit right here, and you can see why I don't do it when it's soft, because it makes it messy. And then let it dry out the rest of the way. So that's handles. Trimming, I'll have to show you later. And let me show you real quick what and how we do the glazing things. Oh, so first, once I get it trimmed, say I've got those trimmed, the next step in the process is I'm going to take it into the kiln room, which kilns are the furnace oven things that we use to fire pottery and ceramics. We don't bake it or cook it. We don't cook it in an oven or bake it. We fire it because cooking and baking and frying and fricasseeing and all of those things happen under 500 degrees. And pretty much everything in there happens over 1,000. So 1,800 degrees is kind of the coolest we really work with. And then we go up to about 2,300 degrees for the high fire glaze firing. So first we take it in there and we put it straight back. There's a sign above it that says drying rack. There's little labels on it that say drying rack. You walk straight back until you walk into the shelf and it says drying rack. If it doesn't say drying rack, it's not the drying rack. It's amazing how much reading the labels really, really helps. Now, if you're not in the right part of the room, then, where is the drying rack? Because this says glaze only. Oh, yeah, it's over there. But if you just Oh, he pointed over here, so I'm going to put it there. It's, yeah, just wrong. So, put it on the drying rack. I will load it into the kiln, or occasionally I have a student, one of my advanced students, help after I've supervised them doing it a few times. But I load it into the kiln, I fire it, and then I bring it over here. So you never go and pull it off the drying rack and glaze it, because this, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. This is bone dry, and this is bisqueware. This is ready to be glazed, this isn't. Can you tell the difference?
It's way drier here.
This is as dry as it gets. This one has been wet recently, but that's not what makes them mainly different. Can you see a difference in color? Bisqueware is always a little more pink, and bone dry clay is always a little more on the green side, which is part of why it's called greenware. Also, you know, like same thing with concrete. Your concrete that's not cured has a greenish color to it, and when it's cured, then it's, you know, not green anymore, and it's used for people who are like, oh yeah, well I'm still kind of green at this. If you ever hear that expression, that's kind of what they're referring to. So this is greenware, meaning it's unfired. So if you can't tell by color, you can flick it. That doesn't actually make much of a ring. Find another one that shows, I mean, it's still more of a ring than you're going to get on the other one, but you should hear better. Right? It's making a ring instead of, like this made very little ring, but this way more of a like woody, hollow thunk type sound. Also, I can go to a spot and try and scrape this with my fingernail. If it scrapes with my fingernail, it's not been fired. This won't scrape with the fingernail. And finally, if you get that wet, it'll dissolve. If you get this wet, it won't. That's the main reason that you can't glaze that. Also, the water tends to, this has become more porous, which means the water can pass through it and everything. So even though I just got this wet, if I throw this in the kiln and fire it, the water will be able to easily evaporate before it reaches the boiling point. If I throw that in the kiln kind of wet, if the water reaches the boiling point before it has time to evaporate, what happens when liquids turn to gases, to the volume of them? They get a lot bigger. So if water in the middle of your pot needs to get really big and it doesn't have anywhere to get big, it's going to push the clay out of the way, meaning explode. And not like a big fiery, exciting explosion. It's more like if you drop your project but you don't get to see it shatter. You just get to see all of the little pieces left over from this project that you worked really hard on. So it's just lame. You know, people are like, oh, explosions, cool, I like explosion. No, it's really not a fun explosion. It's just boring. So make sure that you don't. Also, if it explodes in the first firing, which sometimes happens because you left it too thick, it ruins your project, and if anything was stacked on it when it exploded, if something fell, it might ruin one or two other projects. If it explodes in the glaze firing, it does this, which I will show you. I've got a good example of why not to do that. From the end of the year. Well, this isn't as bad as it. Oh, actually, I think it was. I tossed some of the garbage. Yeah, it does that. It's a really nice bowl that you worked really hard on, and then there's all that crap stuck to the bottom forever. And it's not even your fault. And so you ruin a whole bunch of other people's projects that they worked really hard on, which should bother you more than just ruining your own. It sure bothers me more. I feel awful if I accidentally break a student's project, and I accidentally break mine fairly often. I'm like, oh crap, I like that. Oh, I'll do it again. But you know, like tons of them get little pieces in them, and they're so close to being really nice, and they worked really hard on it. And yeah, sometimes they're completely ruined. Even those little tiny pieces, you have to grind it and refire the whole thing. When you refire stuff in the high firing, in the glaze firings, second time around, it never, there's a lot more things that can go wrong. It's just bad news all around. So, assuming you figured out that it has been bisque fired, put it on the drying rack. I stuck it over here on one of these shelves. Everybody stand up and wander over here. Actually, on your way over here, pick somebody in the room you don't know, walk over to them, say, hi, my name is blah, 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 what's your name? And tell each other your favorite TV show. And then come over here. Ready, go. Find somebody you don't know yet.
No, I heard that was good, but I haven't watched it yet. I like digging.
Okay, and when I said wander over here, one, I'm trying to get your blood flowing a little bit, and two, can't see, so come over like, these three guys need to be the very, very back row. I mean, they don't have to be in the back row, where they're standing has to be in the back row. Everybody else needs to come closer over here. Okay, so glaze is made up of the same stuff that clay is for the most part. It's dirt, except glazes often have some more interesting bits of dirt, like you know. I mean, some of them are not terribly more interesting. The red rocks around here are because there's iron oxide in the rocks, and so a little bit of iron oxide makes it kind of that reddish color. And so, you know, we've got the iron red glaze, which oddly enough has good iron oxide in it. But we also have some more interesting things like, you know, cobalt and copper and various other things that make for interesting chemical reactions when they're liquefied.